I never thought my own son, a doctor, would look me straight in the eye as I was bleeding out on a hospital gurney and tell me with utter coldness, "I'd rather die than save a failure like you." Those were the exact words that came out of Julian's mouth when the doctors asked him to donate blood to save my life. What he didn't know was that I had a hidden camera recording every second of his betrayal. Before we continue, subscribe and hit the notification bell because we publish new stories every day. Leave a like and tell us in the comments what city and country you're watching from. My name is Eleanor Vance. I'm 68 years old, and for my entire life, I believed I had raised my son well. I built a real estate empire from nothing, working 18-hour days for 40 years to give Julian everything I never had. I paid for the best private schools on the North Shore of Chicago, a medical degree from Northwestern University's Feinberg School of Medicine, and I even gifted him his first clinic when he graduated. I thought I had raised an honorable man, a doctor who understood the value of saving lives. How wrong I was. It all started on Tuesday, October 23rd, 2024, at 3 o'clock in the morning. I had been feeling strange for several days, with abdominal pains I initially chalked up to my age. That night, the pain became unbearable, and I started vomiting blood. My neighbor, Mr. Peterson, found me passed out in the hallway of my condominium building in the Gold Coast and immediately called an ambulance. At Northwestern Memorial Hospital, Dr. Matthews explained the severity of my situation. I had massive internal bleeding caused by ruptured esophageal varices, a complication I never knew I had. My blood pressure had dropped dangerously, and I needed an immediate transfusion of type O-negative blood. The problem was that the hospital's blood bank had limited reserves of my blood type, and my condition was critical. "Mrs. Vance," Dr. Matthews told me in a grave voice, "we need to urgently contact compatible relatives. Your blood type is rare, and every minute counts." The nurse, Sarah, had already called Julian, who arrived at the hospital at exactly 5:15 in the morning. When I saw my son walk through the emergency room door, I felt a relief I can never describe. Julian was 42 years old, a cardiovascular surgeon at Rush University Medical Center, and he knew perfectly well that we shared the same blood type because he had donated for me years ago during a minor surgery. I thought my nightmare was over. "Doctor," Matthews approached Julian and quickly explained the situation. "Dr. Vance, your mother needs an urgent transfusion. You have the same blood type, according to our records. Could you donate 400 milliliters? It's a matter of life and death." What happened next forever changed the image I had of my son. Julian stared at me with an expression I had never seen on his face. It wasn't concern. It wasn't filial love. It was something much colder and more calculating. He remained silent for several seconds that felt like an eternity. "Dr. Vance?" Dr. Matthews insisted. "We need your answer immediately." Julian took a deep breath and spoke the words that were forever seared into my heart. "I'm not donating a single drop of my blood to save this failure. I'd rather die than save a failure like you, Mom." A deathly silence fell over the emergency room. The nurse, Sarah, stood with her mouth agape. Dr. Matthews couldn't believe what he had just heard. I felt as if a dagger had been plunged into my chest. The physical pain of the hemorrhage was nothing compared to the emotional pain of hearing those words from my own son. "But doctor," Matthews stammered. "She's your mother. She's dying." "Exactly," Julian replied with a cruel smirk I will never forget. "And the sooner she dies, the better for everyone, especially for me." After Julian spoke those devastating words, Dr. Matthews had to urgently find other options to save my life. Fortunately, they managed to locate a compatible donor at a neighboring hospital, and the transfusion was successful. But the emotional damage was already done. My own son would have rather watched me die than lift a finger to help me. During the next 5 days, I remained hospitalized. I decided to pretend my condition was more serious than it actually was. The doctors had stabilized me, but I feigned confusion, extreme weakness, and difficulty speaking coherently. I wanted to observe my family's behavior when they thought I was on the brink of death or, worse, losing my mental faculties. On Friday afternoon, while pretending to be asleep in my hospital bed, I overheard a conversation between Julian and his wife Caroline that chilled me to the bone. They had tiptoed into my room, believing I was unconscious due to the medication. "Are you sure she can't hear us?" Caroline whispered nervously, glancing at my bed. "Positive," Julian answered coldly. "The doctors said she's having episodes of severe confusion. Besides, they're giving her heavy sedatives. She won't know a thing." What I heard next proved to me that my son's cruelty knew no bounds. Caroline began talking about their plans for my future, as if I were an inconvenience they needed to get rid of as soon as possible. "Julian, we can't wait any longer," Caroline said in a calculating voice. "You have to speed up the process to get her into the St. Jude's senior living facility. The longer we wait, the greater the risk she fully recovers and we lose our chance." "I've already spoken with the director of the facility," my son replied. "They can have her ready by next Wednesday. Once she's there, it will be much easier to prove she's not competent to manage her own affairs." Caroline moved closer to the bed where I lay motionless, controlling my breathing to seem completely oblivious to their conversation. "And what about the properties?" she asked in a very low voice. "The apartment building in Lincoln Park, the lake house in Michigan, and above all, the main bank account. According to the lawyer, she has almost $800,000 in cash, not counting investments." "It's all planned," Julian replied with a confidence that terrified me. "Once she's in the facility, we'll submit the medical documentation I prepared with my colleague, Dr. Evans. We'll certify that she suffers from advanced senile dementia and can't make financial decisions for herself. I'll automatically be appointed her legal guardian." "Are you absolutely sure it will work?" Caroline pressed. "We can't afford any mistakes. If they find out she's perfectly lucid—" "Don't worry," Julian interrupted her. "I have 30 years of medical experience. I know exactly how to write a report that will be indisputable. Besides, I've already spoken with the attorney, Thompson. For $3,000, he'll handle all the legal paperwork without asking any uncomfortable questions." Caroline seemed to relax a bit but still had doubts. "And what if Chloe suspects something?" she asked, referring to my 16-year-old granddaughter. "You know she adores her grandmother. She's always been very close to her." "Chloe is a teenager," Julian replied dismissively. "What is she going to do? Besides, once we have control of the finances, we can send her to study abroad. Far from here, far from trouble." The conversation continued for another 10 minutes, during which I discovered horrifying details about their plans. They had been preparing this operation for months, waiting for the right moment. My health crisis had been the perfect opportunity they were looking for. Julian revealed he had enormous debts that I knew nothing about. He had lost a malpractice lawsuit the previous year and had to pay a settlement of $320,000 to the family of a patient who had died due to his negligence. He had also been investing in shady businesses that had resulted in catastrophic losses. "Without the old woman's money, we're going to lose the house, the car, everything," Julian admitted in desperation. "The Herrera family's lawyers aren't going to wait much longer. If we don't pay the settlement by the end of the year, they'll seize everything we own." Caroline nodded in understanding. "That's why it's so important to act fast. Once we have access to her accounts, we can clear all the debts and start over." When they finally left, my mind was racing. In less than a week, I had discovered that my son had not only denied me the blood that could have saved my life, but he had also been plotting to steal everything I had worked for decades to build. But there was something Julian and Caroline didn't know, something that would completely change the course of this story and turn the hunter into the hunted. What Julian and Caroline were completely unaware of was that for 6 months, I had installed an audio recording system in several strategic locations due to an entirely different situation. My downstairs neighbor, Mr. Henderson, had been stealing mail and packages from the building, and as the condo board president, I needed evidence to report him. I had placed small, voice-activated recording devices in the foyer, in my home office, and, curiously, in my bedroom as well. When I returned home the following Monday after being discharged, the first thing I did was review all the recordings from the hospital. I had a portable device I always carried in my inner jacket pocket, something I had acquired on my lawyer's advice after some trouble with difficult tenants in my rental properties. Listening to the recordings, I confirmed every poisonous word my son had spoken. His brutal refusal to donate blood, his plans to fraudulently commit me, and the entire conspiracy to steal my estate were recorded with crystal clarity. but I needed more information before I could act. Over the next few days, I continued to feign weakness and mental confusion whenever Julian or Caroline visited. It was crucial that they believed their plan was working perfectly. Meanwhile, I discreetly contacted my trusted private investigator, Frank Miller, who had worked for me in the past, resolving issues with problem tenants and verifying the backgrounds of business partners. Mrs. Vance, Frank said during our secret meeting at a quiet coffee shop on Michigan Avenue, I need you to give me every detail you can about your son's financial activities. If he really has the debts you mention, he must have left a trail. I gave him all the information I had gathered, names of lawyers, approximate dates of the malpractice trial, and the snippets of conversation I had recorded. Frank took meticulous notes and promised me results in 72 hours. While waiting for Frank's report, I decided to investigate some aspects that I found particularly unsettling on my own. I called my old friend, Richard Gable, who had been the director of the Illinois State Medical Board for 15 years before retiring. Richard had contacts throughout the Chicago healthcare sector. Eleanor, what you're telling me is very strange, Richard said after listening to my story. Julian always had an impeccable reputation at the hospital. However, now that you mention it, a few months ago there were rumors about a complicated case at Rush, but the details were kept very quiet. Richard promised to make some discreet inquiries and find out exactly what had happened with my son's professional career. Meanwhile, I continued to play my part as a confused and vulnerable old woman, a role that became harder to bear each day. On Thursday afternoon, Frank called me with news that surpassed my worst expectations. We had arranged to meet in Lincoln Park, near the conservatory, where we could talk without risk of being overheard. Mrs. Vance, Frank began with a grave expression, your son's situation is much worse than you imagined. I've gained access to court documents that show Julian was sued not for one case of malpractice, but for 3 different cases between January and July of this year. Frank's report revealed a terrifying reality. Julian had been performing unnecessary surgeries on elderly patients, charging exorbitant fees for procedures they didn't need. The Herrera family, whom they had mentioned in their conversation, were not the only ones affected. There were at least 6 other families who had filed civil and criminal complaints against my son. According to my sources at the courthouse, Frank continued, the total damages he has to pay amount to more than $500,000. But there's something even worse. The district attorney's office is investigating possible charges of aggravated fraud and serious bodily harm. He could face between 5 and 8 years in prison if all charges are proven. The information was overwhelming. But Frank wasn't finished. He had discovered that Caroline, far from being an innocent victim of circumstances, had been an active accomplice in her husband's fraudulent schemes. As a lawyer specializing in healthcare law, she had helped draft deceptive contracts and had advised Julian on how to evade legal responsibility. Your daughter-in-law has her own law firm, but it's on the verge of bankruptcy, Frank explained. She's been diverting money from client accounts to cover Julian's legal defense costs. The State Bar Association has already opened a disciplinary investigation against her, but the most shocking revelation was yet to come. Frank had discovered that Julian and Carolyn had been forging my signature on various documents over the past few months. They had tried to transfer ownership of my rental apartment in the Wicker Park neighborhood to a shell company they controlled. It was only the chance intervention of your estate attorney, Mr. Davies, that prevented the transfer from going through, Frank explained. Mr. Davies became suspicious when he saw that the signature didn't exactly match the samples he had on file and decided to postpone it until he could speak with you personally. Now I understood why Julian and Caroline were so desperate to prove my mental incapacity. It wasn't just to access my money, but to legitimize all the forgeries they had already committed. If they succeeded in having me declared incompetent, they could argue that any irregularities in the documents were due to my deteriorating mental state. That night, alone in my apartment, I reviewed all the information I had gathered. I had recordings of their conspiratorial conversations, evidence of their massive debts, proof of document forgery, and testimony from multiple victims of Julian's fraudulent schemes. It was time to switch from defense to offense. With all the evidence I had gathered, it was time to consult with professionals who could help me use this information legally and effectively. On Friday morning, I requested an urgent appointment with my trusted lawyer, Mr. Gonzalo Ferrer, who had handled all my legal affairs for the last 20 years. Mrs. Vance, Gonzalo said after meticulously reviewing all the documents I presented, this is far more serious than I initially thought. We're not just talking about an attempted family fraud, but an organized criminal network affecting multiple victims. Gonzalo explained that the forgeries of my signature constituted the crime of document fraud, that the conspiracies to declare me incompetent represented attempted aggravated fraud, and that Julian's fraudulent medical schemes could be classified as crimes against public health. Each of these charges carried significant prison sentences. However, Gonzalo continued, we must proceed with extreme caution. Your son and daughter-in-law are professionals with influential contacts in the legal and medical systems. We need a strategy that is absolutely irrefutable. During our 3-hour meeting, we developed a meticulous plan that would attack from multiple fronts simultaneously. First, we would file a formal complaint with the Chicago District Attorney's Office for the crimes of document forgery. Second, we would send all evidence of the medical fraud to the State Medical Board and the Food and Drug Administration. Third, we would file a civil lawsuit to recover any money they had managed to fraudulently withdraw. But there's something more important than all of this, Gonzalo warned me. We need to immediately protect all your financial assets. If Julian and Caroline suspect you're investigating them, they might try to accelerate their plans or even destroy evidence. That same afternoon, accompanied by Gonzalo, I visited all my banks to implement additional security measures. I changed all the passwords. I stipulated that any transaction over $1,000 required my physical presence with 2 forms of identification, and I requested to be notified immediately of any attempt to access my accounts by third parties. At the Chase Bank branch on Michigan Avenue, where I held my main account, the manager, Miss Albright, informed me of something that made my blood run cold. Mrs. Vance, Miss Albright said with clear concern, 2 weeks ago, we received a visit from your son, accompanied by a lawyer. They presented medical documentation that supposedly certified you were suffering from severe cognitive decline and requested access to your bank statements. And what did you do? I asked, restraining my outrage. Fortunately, our protocol requires that these types of requests be processed exclusively by the Central Legal Department, which takes at least 15 business days, Miss Albright replied. Furthermore, I requested to speak with you personally before proceeding with any changes to your account, but your son insisted it was impossible due to your mental state. Gonzalo took detailed notes of this information and requested copies of all the documents Julian had submitted. When we reviewed them, we discovered something extraordinary. The medical certificates were forged, but not by Julian directly, but by his colleague, Dr. Teodoro Evans, who had apparently been paid to create fraudulent medical documentation. This significantly broadens the scope of the conspiracy, Gonzalo observed. Now we have evidence that other medical professionals are involved in forging official documents. Over the next few days, while I continued to feign mental confusion in front of my family, I worked intensively with my legal team to strengthen our case. Frank, my investigator, had managed to discreetly contact some of the victims of Julian's medical frauds, and their testimonies were devastating. One of the victims, Mrs. Evelyn Reed, a 74-year-old woman, told me her story via a video conference that Gonzalo arranged in his office. Dr. Vance convinced me that I needed urgent heart surgery, Mrs. Reed explained, her voice trembling. He told me that without the operation, I would die in less than 3 months. I paid $45,000 for a procedure that, as we later discovered, was completely unnecessary. My heart was perfectly healthy. Mrs. Reed's case was particularly egregious because Julian had falsified her cardiac exam results to justify the unnecessary surgery. He had altered electrocardiograms, manipulated echocardiograms, and had bribed lab technicians to provide falsified blood analyses. But the worst part, Mrs. Reed continued, is that during the unnecessary operation, Dr. Vance damaged a perfectly healthy artery. Now I have real heart problems that I didn't have before I met him. My family is financially ruined, and my health is destroyed because of his greed. When the video conference ended, I sat in silence for several minutes. I couldn't believe that the son I had raised with so much love and dedication was capable of causing so much suffering to innocent people. But the most disturbing realization was that I had, inadvertently, financed his entire medical education and had helped create this monster. Gonzalo pulled me from my thoughts with a proposal that would completely change the course of our strategy. "Mrs. Vance," he said with determination, "I believe the time has come to set a trap for your son and daughter-in-law. We have enough evidence to proceed legally, but if we can get them to incriminate themselves even further, we can secure much harsher sentences and prevent them from manipulating the judicial system with their contacts." The trap Gonzalo proposed was as brilliant in its simplicity as it was devastating in its potential implications. Gonzalo's plan was as ingenious as it was dangerous. The idea was to organize a family meeting where I would pretend to be completely mentally lost, creating the perfect opportunity for Julian and Caroline to reveal all their plans in front of hidden witnesses and professional recording equipment. "We're going to simulate that you want to make urgent changes to your will," Gonzalo explained during our planning session. "We'll tell them you're confused about your properties and that you want to distribute everything before you die. This will force them to show their true nature and commit themselves further with incriminating statements. To execute this strategy, we needed the cooperation of my estate attorney, Mr. Davies, who had already proven his integrity by stopping the previous fraudulent transfers. Mr. Davies agreed to participate after learning all the details of the conspiracy against me. "Mrs. Vance," Mr. Davies assured me, "as an attorney, I've seen many cases of elder abuse, but never anything as elaborate and cruel as this. It will be an honor to help you unmask these criminals." The following Wednesday, I called Julian from my landline, making sure to sound confused and vulnerable. "My son," I said with an artificially trembling voice, "I need to see you urgently. I'm very worried about my things, about the money, about everything. I think I'm going to die soon, and I don't know what to do with my properties." Julian responded with a false concern that I found nauseating after knowing his true intentions. "Mom, calm down," he said in a patronizing tone. "Caroline and I will come over tomorrow afternoon to talk with you. Don't worry about anything. We'll take care of everything." "But I can't remember where I have the important papers," I continued my act. "Sometimes I forget things, son. Do you think something serious is happening in my head?" "It's normal at your age, Mom," Julian replied, and I could detect a note of satisfaction in his voice. "That's why it's important that you settle all your affairs while you still can. Don't worry, we'll sort everything out tomorrow." That night, Gonzalo and his team discreetly installed audio and video recording equipment in my main living room. They used tiny cameras hidden in picture frames, decorative plants, and even in the wall clock I had inherited from my father. The microphones were so small they were completely invisible, but they captured conversations with professional quality. "Remember, Mrs. Vance," Gonzalo instructed me, "you must appear confused, but not completely incoherent. We want them to believe you can make decisions about your will, but that you're deteriorated enough to be easily manipulated." On Thursday, at 4 o'clock in the afternoon, Julian and Caroline arrived punctually at my apartment. I received them in my pajamas and robe, with disheveled hair, acting as if I had trouble recognizing them at first. "Julian? Is that you, son?" I asked, feigning confusion. "Oh, yes. And you are. What's your name?" "Ah, Caroline, of course. Forgive me, sometimes I forget things." Caroline exchanged a meaningful look with Julian. It was clear they interpreted my behavior as confirmation that my mental decline had progressed considerably since our last conversation. "Mom," Julian said, sitting next to me on the sofa, "you told us you wanted to talk about your properties and your money. What exactly are you worried about?" "It's just that I don't know where I have the papers," I replied, acting nervous. "I have a lot of money in the bank, right? And I have houses too. But I can't remember how many or where they are. I'm afraid that when I die, everything will be lost." Caroline leaned forward with a seemingly sympathetic expression, but I could see the greed shining in her eyes. "Mrs. Vance," she said in a honeyed voice, "don't you worry about that. Julian and I can help you organize everything. Why don't you tell us what properties you remember having?" For the next hour, I pretended to be confused about my assets while they tried to pry detailed information from me. I deliberately mentioned incorrect figures, wrong dates, and imprecise locations of my properties. Every mistake I made seemed to reassure them more, convincing them I was truly losing my mental faculties. "Mom," Julian finally said, "I think it would be a good idea for you to sign some documents to make sure everything is in order. Caroline can prepare the necessary papers so you won't have to worry about these things anymore." "What kind of documents?" I asked, feigning naivety. "Well," Caroline replied carefully, "we could create a general power of attorney so Julian can manage your bank accounts and pay your bills. It would also be wise to transfer the properties to his name to avoid problems with the IRS when the time comes." "You mean when I die?" I asked directly. "Exactly," Julian confirmed without showing any emotion. "It's the smartest thing you can do now while you're still relatively lucid." What they said next exceeded all my expectations. Believing I was completely vulnerable and manipulable, they began revealing specific details of their plans I had never heard before. "Look, Mom," Julian said with chilling cruelty, "the truth is, Caroline and I have been preparing all of this for months. We knew that sooner or later your mind would start to fail, and we needed to be ready." "Julian's right," Caroline added. "We've consulted with several specialists, and they all agree that the best thing for you is to have someone younger and more capable manage your financial affairs." "But I can still think," I protested weakly. "I'm not crazy." Julian laughed with a coldness that froze my blood. "Mom, last week you asked me the same question 3 times in 5 minutes. Yesterday, you called Caroline by my mother's name, who died 15 years ago. And right now, you don't remember where you keep your important documents. Do you really think you're capable of managing $800,000? The conversation continued for another 20 minutes, and with every word they spoke, Julian and Caroline sank deeper into their own lies, revealing the true extent of their conspiracy. What shocked me most was discovering they had even involved my granddaughter Chloe in their manipulative plans. "And what are we going to do about Chloe?" Caroline asked, looking toward the door as if she feared the teenager might appear at any moment. "Chloe won't be a problem," Julian replied with complete coldness. "We'll tell her that her grandmother is sick and needs special care. Once we have legal control of everything, we'll send her to study in London with my sister, Carmen. Far from here, far from uncomfortable questions." "But won't she suspect something when she sees her grandmother no longer lives in her apartment?" Caroline insisted. "By the time she realizes, it'll be too late," Julian replied with a shrug. "Besides, Chloe's a kid. What can she do against 2 adults with college degrees and legal connections?" Hearing how they planned to manipulate and send away my granddaughter, the only person in the family who truly loved me, was the moment I decided I had heard enough. It was time to play my winning card. I stood up slowly, pretending to need the arm of the sofa for support, and walked toward my desk where I kept some important documents. Julian and Caroline watched me intently, probably expecting me to have another episode of confusion. "Son," I said, turning to them, "there's something I need to show you before I sign any documents." "What is it, Mom?" Julian asked, with poorly concealed impatience. Instead of answering immediately, I took out my cell phone and dialed a number I had memorized. The call connected on the first ring. "Gonzalo," I said clearly into the phone. "You and Mr. Davies can come up now. We have everything we need." The expression on Julian and Caroline's faces instantly changed, from condescending confidence to total confusion, and then to gradual horror as they began to understand what was happening. "Mom?" Julian stammered. "What are you talking about? Who is Gonzalo?" Instead of answering, I walked to the window and opened the curtains that had been closed throughout our conversation. The evening light flooded the living room, revealing for the first time the small cameras that had been recording every second of our meeting. "Do you see that camera behind your grandmother's portrait, Julian?" I said, pointing to the wall. "And that other one in the corner plant? And the microphone hidden in the clock I inherited from my father?" Caroline shot up from the sofa, her face completely pale. "What does this mean, Eleanor?" she asked, her voice trembling. "It means, dear Caroline," I replied with a calmness that surprised even myself, "that for the last 90 minutes, you have been confessing on professional-grade cameras every crime you have committed against me and plan to commit in the future." At that moment, footsteps were heard in the hallway, and the front door opened. Gonzalo entered, accompanied by Mr. Davies, my attorney, and 2 other people whom Julian and Caroline did not immediately recognize. "Good afternoon," Gonzalo said, addressing my son and daughter-in-law. "I am Gonzalo Ferrer, Mrs. Vance's attorney, and these are Detective Miller from the Chicago Police Department and District Attorney Chen." The silence that followed this introduction was deafening. Julian and Caroline stood completely still, like pillars of salt, as they processed the magnitude of the trap they had fallen into. "Detective?" Julian finally murmured. "District Attorney? I don't understand what's happening here." Detective Miller approached them, showing his official identification: Dr. Julian Vance and Mrs. Caroline Vance. "You are under investigation for multiple felonies, including document forgery, attempted aggravated fraud, conspiracy to commit fraud, and in the case of Dr. Vance, also for medical malpractice and serious injury against multiple patients." "This is ridiculous," Caroline shouted, partially regaining her composure. "We haven't done anything illegal. We were simply trying to help an elderly woman who is clearly losing her mental faculties." "Really?" District Attorney Chen intervened with a cold smile. "Then can you explain why you attempted to forge Mrs. Vance's signature on property transfer documents? And why Dr. Vance submitted falsified medical certificates to 3 different banks, claiming his mother suffered from senile dementia when that is clearly not the case?" Julian finally found his voice, but the words that came out only worsened his situation. "How can you accuse me of forging medical certificates?" he protested. "I am a cardiovascular surgeon with 30 years of experience. I, better than anyone, can assess my own mother's mental state. That is precisely why your actions are so egregious," the DA replied. "A doctor who uses his professional position to commit fraud against his own family and against innocent patients deserves the most severe penalties our criminal code allows." Gonzalo came over to me and placed a comforting hand on my shoulder. "Mrs. Vance," he said, "are you ready to tell these authorities everything you have discovered about the criminal activities of your son and daughter-in-law?" I looked directly into Julian's eyes, the son I had raised with so much love and dedication, the man who had denied me his blood when I was dying and who had plotted to steal everything I had worked for decades to build. "Detective," I said, my voice firm and clear, "I have a lot to tell you." For the next 2 hours, my living room turned into a makeshift interrogation room, where I meticulously revealed all the information I had gathered over weeks of investigation. Detective Miller took detailed statements while District Attorney Chen reviewed every document, every recording, and every piece of evidence we had prepared. "I'll start at the beginning," I told the authorities, as Julian and Caroline sat in complete silence. "Last October 23rd, my son denied me a blood transfusion that could have saved my life, telling me verbatim, 'I'd rather die than save a failure like you.' All of this was recorded on my personal device." Gonzalo played the recording from the hospital on the audio equipment we had set up. Hearing those cruel words again, but this time in front of judicial authorities, gave me a satisfaction I hadn't felt in months. "But that was only the beginning," I continued. "I later discovered that my son and daughter-in-law had been planning to have me declared mentally incompetent to steal my entire estate and pay off the enormous debts Julian had accumulated from medical malpractice lawsuits." District Attorney Chen interrupted my story to address Julian directly. "Dr. Vance," she said in a stern tone, "our prior investigations have confirmed that you are facing at least 6 civil lawsuits for a total of $540,000 in damages. Is this correct?" Julian exchanged a desperate look with Caroline before answering. "Your Honor, those lawsuits are completely baseless," he lied shamelessly. "They are from disgruntled patients looking for easy money by suing successful doctors. My professional insurance will take care of everything." "Your professional insurance?" the DA retorted with a sardonic smile. "According to our records, your insurance policy was canceled 8 months ago for non-payment of premiums. Furthermore, we have testimony from at least 4 victims confirming that you performed completely unnecessary medical procedures on them." Detective Miller pulled a bulky folder from his briefcase and began reading specific names and dates. "Evelyn Reed, unnecessary heart surgery, $45,000. Ricardo Navarro Sanz, fraudulent spine operation, $38,000. Mercedes Lopez Fernandez, removal of a healthy gallbladder, $22,000. Shall I continue, Dr. Vance?" With every name the detective mentioned, Julian grew paler. It was obvious he hadn't expected the authorities to have such detailed information about his victims. But there's more, I continued. During my recovery in the hospital, I overheard a conversation between Julian and Caroline where they planned to fraudulently commit me to a nursing home and forge medical documents to have me declared incompetent. Gonzalo then played the recordings he had obtained at the hospital, where the voices of Julian and Caroline discussing their criminal plans were clearly audible. The audio quality was perfect, and every word was unmistakable. When the playback finished, Caroline finally lost the composure she had maintained until then. "This is an elaborate setup," she shouted, jumping to her feet abruptly. "A vengeful old woman is inventing false accusations against her own family. Eleanor never had cameras in her house. This is all a sham." District Attorney Chen looked at her with an expression that could have frozen molten lava. "Mrs. Vance," she said in an icy voice, "are you suggesting that Mrs. Vance falsified the recordings where you confessed to multiple felonies? Are you implying that she hired actors to perfectly imitate your voices? Or perhaps you think she bribed multiple victims of your husband's medical frauds to lie to the authorities?" Detective Miller then approached Caroline and showed her another set of documents. "Furthermore, Mrs. Vance, we have evidence that you, as an attorney, actively participated in the forgery of medical certificates and in the attempts of fraudulent property transfer. The Illinois State Bar Association has already initiated disciplinary proceedings against you." "What medical certificates?" Caroline asked, trying to sound innocent, but her trembling voice betrayed her completely. "The certificate signed by Dr. Teodoro Evans stating that Mrs. Vance suffered from severe senile dementia," the detective replied. "Certificates that you presented to 3 different banking institutions trying to gain access to your mother-in-law's accounts." Gonzalo then intervened, with information that was the final blow for Caroline. "Detective," my lawyer said, "we have also discovered that Mrs. Vance diverted money from the fiduciary accounts of her own clients to pay for her husband's legal defense expenses. This constitutes aggravated embezzlement." The color drained completely from Caroline's face. It was obvious she didn't know we had discovered that information as well. Julian, seeing that the situation was completely untenable, tried one last, desperate strategy. "Mom," he said to me in a pleading voice, "this is all a terrible misunderstanding. Yes, it's true I have financial problems, but I never really wanted to hurt you. I was just desperate. If you drop all the charges, I promise to pay back every dollar I tried to take." His pathetic plea filled me with a mixture of pity and disgust. This was the same man who had denied me his blood when I was dying, who had planned to steal everything I owned, and who had caused unspeakable suffering to innocent patients. "Julian," I replied with a calmness that surprised me, "when you denied me your blood in the hospital, you forever destroyed any chance of reconciliation between us. A mother can forgive many things, but she can never forget when her own son would rather see her die than help her." District Attorney Chen then addressed them both in an official tone. "Dr. Julian Vance and Mrs. Caroline Vance, you are hereby formally charged with conspiracy to commit aggravated fraud, forgery of official documents, and, in the case of Dr. Vance, also with medical malpractice resulting in serious injury. You have the right to remain silent and to contact a defense attorney." Detective Miller approached them with handcuffs at the ready. "Furthermore," he added, "you are being placed under preventive detention until the bail hearing, which will take place next Monday." As I watched them handcuff my son and daughter-in-law, I felt a strange mixture of justice served and profound sadness. I had won this battle, but I had lost my family forever. After the authorities took Julian and Caroline away in handcuffs, a strange, heavy silence descended upon my apartment. Gonzalo, Mr. Davies, and I were left alone, surrounded by the recording equipment that had captured the most devastating confession I had ever witnessed. "Mrs. Vance," Gonzalo said, putting documents back into his briefcase, "the hardest part is over. Now we must prepare for the legal consequences that will come in the following days and weeks." Over the next 3 days, the media seized on the story of the arrest of a prestigious cardiovascular surgeon and his lawyer wife for family fraud and medical malpractice. The newspaper headlines were devastating. Dr. Denise blood to dying mother. Surgeon scams elderly patients with unnecessary operations. Lawyer steals from clients to defend criminal husband. On Saturday morning, I received a call that completely surprised me. It was my granddaughter, Chloe, who had been spending the weekend at her best friend's house when her parents were arrested. "Grandma," she said, her voice trembling, "I just found out about everything on the news. Is what they're saying about Mom and Dad true?" The conversation with Chloe was one of the hardest of my life. How do you explain to a 16-year-old girl that her parents were criminals who had tried to rob her own grandmother? How do you tell her that her father had denied me a blood transfusion that could have saved my life? "Chloe, sweetie," I said, choosing my words carefully, "your father and mother made some very serious mistakes, but I want you to know that none of this is your fault, and I will always love you no matter what happens." "Can I come see you, Grandma?" she asked, her voice breaking. "I don't have anyone else now." "Of course you can, my love," I replied immediately. "This will always be your home." When Chloe arrived that afternoon, she brought a small suitcase and eyes swollen from crying. I held her for several minutes without saying a word, feeling her small body tremble against mine. "Grandma," she finally whispered, "why did Dad do those terrible things to you? I always thought he loved you." That question forced me to reflect deeply on the mistakes I might have made as a mother. I had spoiled Julian, giving him everything without teaching him the value of hard work and sacrifice. I had been too permissive when he showed the first signs of selfishness and lack of empathy. "Chloe," I finally said, "sometimes people change in ways we can't understand or predict. Your father let greed get the better of him, and he lost sight of what truly matters in life." During that week, while Julian and Caroline remained in custody awaiting their court hearing, the first consequences of their actions began to unfold. Rush University Medical Center immediately suspended Julian's medical license and launched an internal investigation into all surgical procedures he had performed over the last 2 years. On Tuesday, Dr. Ricardo Mendoza Herrera, the hospital's chief medical officer, called me personally to apologize for not detecting the irregularities in my son's professional conduct sooner. "Mrs. Vance, Dr. Mendoza said, I want to express our sincerest apologies. As a medical institution, we failed by not supervising Dr. Julian Vance's activities more strictly. We are reviewing all of his cases and contacting every patient who may have been affected." That same week, the Illinois State Medical Board officially announced Julian's expulsion from the professional organization, meaning he could never again practice medicine in the state. The decision was unanimous and was based not only on the fraud against patients, but also on the violation of the Hippocratic Oath by denying medical assistance to his own mother. In parallel, the State Bar Association immediately suspended Caroline's professional license and froze all accounts of her law firm after confirming she had diverted client funds for personal use. On Friday of that week, Gonzalo informed me about the first judicial decisions related to the case. "Mrs. Vance," he said during our meeting at his office, "the DAA has decided to seek prison sentences of 6 to 8 years for Julian for the crimes of aggravated fraud, document forgery, and medical malpractice. For Caroline, she's asking for 4 to 6 years for complicity in fraud and embezzlement." "And what are their chances of avoiding prison?" I asked him. "Very slim," Gonzalo replied flatly. "The evidence is overwhelming. They have multiple victims willing to testify, and the crimes are perfectly documented on audio and video recordings. Besides, the case has received a lot of media attention, which makes it unlikely that the judges will be lenient." During those days, I also received calls from some of the victims of Julian's medical frauds. Mrs. Evelyn Reed, the elderly woman who had undergone the unnecessary heart surgery, contacted me to thank me for reporting my son. "Mrs. Vance," she said with an emotional voice, "I know how difficult it must have been for you to report your own son. But thanks to your courage, my family and I will finally get justice. Your son stole my life savings and nearly killed me with an operation I didn't need." These conversations with Julian's victims helped me confirm that I had made the right decision, no matter how personally painful it was. On Sunday evening, while I was having a quiet dinner with Chloe in my apartment, the phone rang. It was a call from the jail. Julian had earned his right to a phone call and had decided to contact me. "Mom?" I heard his broken voice through the receiver. "Please," I need to talk to you, please. Chloe looked at me with questioning eyes, waiting to see my reaction. After several seconds of silence, I made the decision that would definitively mark the future of our relationship. Julian, I said, my voice firm but calm, you have 5 minutes to say what you have to say. Mom? Julian began, his voice a sound I had never heard before, broken by sobs and desperation. I know I don't deserve your forgiveness, but I need you to know I never wanted things to go this far. Everything just got out of control. Chloe moved closer to me, and I could see the tears streaming down her cheeks as she listened to her father pleading from jail. I motioned for her to sit beside me, because this conversation would affect her directly as well. Julian, I replied, maintaining a neutral tone, you had multiple opportunities to tell me the truth about your financial problems. You could have come to me as a son should to his mother when he needs help. Instead, you chose to lie, to steal, and when I needed you most, you denied me something as basic as a blood transfusion. I know, Mom. I know, Julian sobbed. I was desperate. The lawsuits, the debts, the pressure. Caroline convinced me it was the only way to save our future. But I never really wanted to hurt you. You never wanted to hurt me? I repeated, with a bitterness I couldn't contain. Julian, you literally told me you'd rather see me die than save my life. How can you now say you didn't want to hurt me? The silence on the other end of the line lasted for several seconds. When Julian spoke again, his voice sounded even more desperate. Mom, I was out of my mind. The pressure, the problems, everything. I said things I didn't really feel. Please, you have to believe me. I'm your son, I'm your own flesh and blood. That's precisely why it hurts so much, I replied. Because you are my son. Because I gave you everything I had. Because I believed in you when no one else did. And you chose to betray me in the cruelest way possible. Chloe took my hand and whispered, Grandma, maybe Dad really is sorry. Julian must have overheard his daughter's comment because he immediately addressed her. Chloe, are you there, sweetheart? He asked, a renewed hope in his voice. Chloe, tell your grandma this has all been a terrible misunderstanding. Tell her your dad isn't the monster they think he is. Julian, I interrupted firmly, do not involve Chloe in this conversation. She has nothing to do with the decisions you made as an adult. But Mom, Julian insisted, Chloe is my daughter. She has a right to know that her father made mistakes, but that he's not a criminal like the media is painting me to be. You're not a criminal? I asked in disbelief. Julian, you performed unnecessary operations on elderly patients, stole their life savings, forged medical documents, tried to steal my estate, and denied me a transfusion that could have saved my life. If that doesn't make you a criminal, then I don't know what does. The conversation was cut short by a background voice informing Julian his call time was ending. Mom, please, he yelled desperately. I can't go to prison. I won't survive in there. Caroline is already talking to her lawyer about a possible plea deal. If you drop the charges, maybe we can work something out. Work something out? I repeated bitterly. Julian, do you really think that after everything you've done, after all the lives you've ruined, you can just work things out? I can pay the money back, he exclaimed. I can compensate all the patients. I can do community service, whatever it takes. With what money are you going to compensate anyone? I asked. According to my research, you owe over $500,000 in damages. Your accounts are frozen, your medical license has been permanently revoked, and your wife has lost her professional license as well. Where exactly do you plan on getting the money to compensate anyone? The silence that followed my question was telling. It was clear Julian hadn't really thought through the practical consequences of his actions. Mom, he finally whispered, if you don't help me, I'm going to lose everything. My career, my freedom, my family. Everything I've worked for 40 years is going to be destroyed. Julian, I replied with a calmness that surprised me. You already lost all of that the moment you decided to put your greed before your honor. I didn't destroy your career. You destroyed it by performing unnecessary operations on innocent patients. I didn't ruin your marriage. You ruined it by involving Caroline in your criminal schemes. And I most certainly did not end our mother-son relationship. You ended it when you denied me your blood while I was bleeding out on a hospital gurney. The background voice cut in again, indicating the call had to end immediately. Mom, please, Julian shouted one last time. "Don't abandon me. I'm your only son." "Julian," I said with a finality that startled even Chloe. "I had a son named Julian Vance. He was a doctor, he was married to a lawyer, and he had a beautiful daughter named Chloe. But that son died for me the day he looked me in the eye and told me he'd rather see me die than help me. The man who is speaking to me from jail is a stranger who shares his name and his face, but he is not my son." I hung up the phone before he could respond. Chloe looked at me with a mixture of awe and sadness. "Grandma," she said softly, "are you really not going to help Dad?" "My love," I replied, taking her hands in mine, "helping your father now would be the worst thing I could possibly do for him. If I allow him to avoid the consequences of his actions, he will never truly learn from what he has done wrong. And more importantly, his victims will never get the justice they deserve." That night, as Chloe slept in the guest room I had prepared especially for her, I received another unexpected call. This time, it was from Caroline, who had apparently also earned her phone call privileges from the women's correctional facility where she was being held. "Mrs. Vance," I heard Caroline's voice through the receiver, noticeably different from her usual tone of professional confidence. It now sounded broken, desperate, completely defeated. "I know I have no right to ask you for anything after everything that has happened, but I need to talk to you about Chloe." I was surprised that Caroline chose to start the conversation by talking about her daughter instead of pleading for her own freedom as Julian had. "What about Chloe?" I asked, maintaining a cautious tone. "She has no one else but you now," Caroline continued, and I could detect genuine tears in her voice. "My sister in Seattle can't take in a teenager, and Julian's parents died years ago. Please, don't let Chloe pay for our mistakes." "Caroline," I replied firmly, "Chloe will always have a home with me. She is my granddaughter, and I love her unconditionally, but I can't say the same for you or for Julian." "I know," Caroline murmured. "Mrs. Vance, I want you to know that this all started as a desperate idea when Julian's financial problems became unsustainable. I never imagined we would go this far, that we would do so much harm." "A desperate idea?" I repeated in disbelief. "Caroline, you and Julian planned for months to steal my estate. You forged medical documents, lied to financial institutions, and even involved corrupt doctors in your conspiracy. That isn't desperation, that's an organized criminal enterprise." The silence on the other end of the line lasted for several seconds before Caroline spoke again, this time with a brutal honesty that caught me completely off guard. "You're right," she admitted. "Mrs. Vance, during these days in jail, I've had time to reflect on everything we did, and I've realized something terrible. At some point, I stopped being a lawyer and became the accomplice of a con man. I helped Julian steal from innocent patients. I stole money from my own clients, and we conspired to steal from you everything you had worked for decades to build." Her confession left me momentarily speechless. It was the first time either of them had fully admitted the extent of their crimes without excuses or justifications. "Why are you telling me this now, Caroline?" I finally asked. "Because I want you to know that I completely understand why you reported us," she replied. "And because I need you to know that, whatever happens to me, Chloe had absolutely nothing to do with any of our crimes. She didn't even suspect we were having financial trouble." Over the next few minutes, Caroline revealed additional details about the extent of their criminal activities that even my investigations hadn't uncovered. She told me about other doctors who had been involved in the unnecessary surgery scheme, about additional patients who had been defrauded, and about the network of corrupt lawyers who had facilitated the document forgeries. "Mrs. Vance," Caroline continued, "my defense attorney has explained that I will face between 4 and 6 years of effective prison time. There's no way to avoid it with all the evidence you gathered, but I want to ask you for a favor that has nothing to do with me or Julian." "What favor?" I asked, curious. "Please, don't let Chloe visit me in prison during the first few years of my sentence," she said with a determination I didn't expect. "A teenager shouldn't see her mother in that environment. I want her to remember the successful lawyer I was before, not the criminal I became." This request struck me deeply. For the first time since this whole nightmare began, Caroline was showing genuine motherly concern above her own self-interest. "Are you sure about that, Caroline?" I asked. "Chloe might need to talk to you, especially during the first few months as she adjusts to this new reality. I'm absolutely sure, she replied with conviction. Mrs. Vance, Chloe is a brilliant young woman with a promising future. You can't let her parents' mistakes define the rest of her life. She needs stability, an education, and above all, she needs the example of honorable people like you. The call was interrupted by the notice that her time was ending, but Caroline had one more thing to say. Mrs. Vance, she said quickly, there's something else you should know. Julian is considering pleading guilty to all charges in exchange for a reduced sentence. His lawyer told him that with a full confession and cooperation with the authorities, he could be out in 3 or 4 years instead of 8. And what are you going to do? I asked. I'm going to follow my lawyer's advice and also plead guilty, she replied. There's no point in prolonging this process with a long trial that would only cause more pain for Chloe and more suffering for the victims of our crimes. After I hung up, I sat in silence for several minutes, reflecting on the 2 conversations I'd had that night. Julian had called seeking pity and trying to evade the consequences of his actions. Caroline had called to take full responsibility and to protect the well-being of her daughter. The next day, Gonzalo visited me with news of the latest legal developments. Mrs. Vance, he informed me, both Julian and Caroline have decided to plead guilty to all charges. The sentencing hearing is scheduled for 2 weeks from now. What does this mean in practical terms? I asked. It means Julian will likely receive a sentence of 4 years of effective prison time, and Caroline will receive 3 years, Gonzalo explained. Furthermore, both will have to pay full restitution to all of their victims, which will leave them completely bankrupt for the rest of their lives. That same week, the State Medical Board published an official statement permanently expelling Julian from the medical profession and recommending that his case be studied in medical schools as an example of an extreme violation of medical ethics. On Friday afternoon, as I was helping Chloe with her homework, I reflected on how a family that seemed perfect from the outside had completely collapsed in a matter of weeks. But I also realized that, in a way, I had gained something priceless. A closer, more honest relationship with my granddaughter, and the confirmation that I had raised her with the right values, even if my own son had chosen to abandon them. Grandma, Chloe said as she closed her books, do you think I'll ever be able to forgive my parents for everything they did? My love, I replied, hugging her, forgiveness isn't something you should feel obligated to give. It's something that will come naturally when you're ready, if you ever are. In the meantime, let's focus on building your future. 3 years have passed since that terrible day in the hospital when my son denied me the transfusion that could have saved my life. As I write these words at my desk, looking out at the autumn cityscape of Chicago through my window, I can say that the most painful decision of my life also turned out to be the most correct one. Julian served exactly 4 years at the Stateville Correctional Center. He got out last March, a completely changed man, gaunt, prematurely aged, and stripped of all the arrogance that had characterized his personality for decades. Prison had broken not only his body, but also the inflated ego that had led him to commit so many crimes. During his time in prison, I never visited him. I kept my word to consider him a stranger, who simply shared the last name of my deceased son. However, through Gonzalo, my lawyer, I stayed informed of his situation. Julian worked in the prison library, completed several rehabilitation programs, and, according to penitentiary reports, showed genuine remorse for his actions. Caroline was released from prison 6 months before Julian, after serving 2.5 years of her sentence. Unlike her ex-husband, she kept the promise she had made to me during that phone call from jail. She never tried to contact Chloe during her incarceration, thus protecting her daughter from the trauma of seeing her in that degrading environment. When Julian regained his freedom, he tried to rebuild his life from scratch in the humblest way possible. Without a medical license, without any assets, and with a criminal record that will follow him forever, he found a job as a clerk in a pharmacy in the Pilsen neighborhood. The owner, Mr. Sullivan, an older man who knew his story, decided to give him a chance after Julian honestly confessed the entire truth about his past. Mrs. Vance, Gonzalo told me during one of our regular meetings, your son is living in a one-room apartment near his job, earning minimum wage, walking to work to save on public transport, and according to my sources, he hasn't tried to contact any of his former medical colleagues. Julian's transformation was complete. From a prestigious cardiovascular surgeon to a pharmacy clerk. From living in a mansion in Winnetka to inhabiting a tiny studio in one of Chicago's most modest neighborhoods. From handling hundreds of thousands of dollars to surviving on less than $1,000 a month. Caroline followed a similar, though slightly different path. She permanently lost her license to practice law, but found a job as an administrative assistant at a veterinary clinic. She lives alone in a rented apartment in a suburb and, from what I've been able to gather, maintains an extremely low profile, avoiding any contact with her former professional circles. What has surprised me most is that Julian and Caroline divorced while they were in prison. Apparently, the pressure of facing the consequences of their crimes completely destroyed their marriage. They now live separate lives, united only by the pain of having lost their daughter and the regret for the decisions they made. Chloe, now 19 years old, has become an extraordinary young woman. She graduated from high school with excellent grades and is currently studying community medicine at Northwestern University, the same institution where her father graduated decades ago. But, unlike Julian, Chloe has chosen to dedicate her career to healing, not to enriching herself. "Grandma," she told me a few weeks ago during one of our weekly family dinners, "I want to be the kind of doctor my father should have been, but never was." The irony of the situation is not lost on me. The son who betrayed me in the cruelest way possible has indirectly given me the most wonderful granddaughter I could have ever hoped for. Chloe inherited her father's intelligence, but she has also developed the compassion and integrity that he lost somewhere along the way. Over these 3 years, I have kept in regular contact with several of the victims of Julian's medical frauds. Mrs. Evelyn Reed, the elderly woman who underwent the unnecessary heart surgery, has fully recovered from the complications caused by the fraudulent operation. With part of the money she recovered through the settlements, she established a small foundation that helps seniors identify and report medical scams. Mrs. Vance, Mrs. Reed told me during our last phone call, "What your son did to me was terrible, but your courage in reporting him saved many others from suffering the same fate. For that, I will always be grateful." Rush University Medical Center implemented new medical oversight protocols as a direct result of the scandal Julian caused. Now, all non-emergency surgical procedures require a mandatory second opinion, and there is a monitoring system that tracks doctors' behavioral patterns to detect potential irregularities. As for my own health, I have fully recovered from the hemorrhage that nearly cost me my life 3 years ago. Ironically, the emotional stress of discovering my son's betrayal and the process of bringing him to justice gave me a new energy and purpose in life. At 71, I feel more vital and mentally sharp than I have in years. I have decided to use my experience to help other seniors who might be victims of family or financial abuse. I volunteer with an organization that specializes in detecting and preventing these types of crimes, sharing my story as an example that it is possible to fight back and get justice, regardless of age or circumstances. 2 months ago, Julian finally tried to contact me through a letter he sent via Gonzalo. In it, he once again asked for forgiveness and expressed his desire to be part of my life again, however limited. The letter was handwritten, with a shaky script that reflected his emotional state, and every paragraph conveyed a regret that seemed genuine. After reading the letter several times and consulting with Chloe, I decided to respond. I wrote him a short letter, explaining that while I could understand his remorse, the wounds he had caused were too deep to ever fully heal. I wished him well in his new life, but I made it clear that our mother-son relationship had definitively ended the day he denied me his blood in the hospital. "The person who wrote this letter may be a good man now," I explained to Chloe after sending my reply, "but he is no longer my son. My son died the day he decided his selfishness was more important than his mother's life." As I finish writing this story, I reflect on the lessons I've learned during these extraordinary years. I have discovered that justice, though painful to obtain, is essential for healing the deepest wounds. I have learned that age is no barrier to defending oneself against those who try to take advantage of us. And most importantly, I have confirmed that genuine family bonds are based on love and mutual respect, not merely on shared blood. My granddaughter, Chloe, represents all the best of what a family can be: unconditional love, mutual support, and shared values that transcend hardship. She is my true heir, not just to my material wealth, but to the principles and dignity I have tried to uphold throughout my life. The story of my son Julian serves as a warning to all those who believe they can betray family trust without consequences. But it is also a story of hope, because it shows that it is never too late to stand up for what is right, no matter how painful the process may be. If you enjoyed this story, support us with a like. Subscribe to the channel and leave your opinions in the comments. To listen to the next story, click on the box that appears on the left. Thank you for joining us.